you
This
first.
conference will now be recorded.
Sorry, John. Just hit a button there.
Right. No, is that a good way? You introduce, because you have the screen, and introduce the council members that are on. And we'll do that first, and then introduce the new council member if she's joined yet, and then see if there's visitors that we want to introduce.
Sounds excellent. Thank you. And thank you, everyone. I agree with John. It has been quite some time since we've gathered the council together. So it's nice to see you all, especially since we're utilizing the cameras, which is an additional treat for us. But so thank you all for joining us. It is just a meeting with no action items. We just have two briefings we'll be presenting to the council today. So to get that started, we'll just go through the council members that are here. I see Jonathan Kays. Welcome. Our vice chair, John Coombe.
Morning.
Larry Schoen. Bob Wright.
Good morning.
Dr. Hobbs, Ben Hobbs.
Good morning, everybody.
Stephen Bunker. Good morning. And I don't want him to take his hands off his wheel. I see Tom Keelan. he's daring. Oh, wow. Went for two hands. I know we have Lita Mock here as well. Maybe Lita, are you able to hit the mute button or let us know in the chat box if you're having issues with that? Sorry, I switched off the attendees list. Let me go back. Thania, you're on the line as well. You may be having some mute button issues. Is that you, Thania? I see your speakers.
Yes, good morning, yes.
Good morning.
I couldn't figure out with the system where the camera is anyway, so I'm used to Zoom, so.
Oh, yeah, should be the top right-hand corner. There may be an icon, like a webcam. That would be great. And I think that is it, except for our new member from DMC. As you all recall. Oh, there we go. Baltimore Metropolitan Council.
Oh, BMC.
Just this on the webcam there as well. Thank you. Nicole, would you like to do introductions for yourself?
Sure. Thank you. Hi, my name's Nicole Hebert, and I'm happy to be here. I'm the new air quality planner for Baltimore Metropolitan Council. To give you guys a little bit of my background, I come from, my previous role was a NEPA transportation planner, and I specialized in project level air quality analysis. So I'm excited to be focusing my work on air quality in the Baltimore region, and happy to serve on this council.
We're thrilled to have you. Thank you for joining us today. Does anyone else on the council have anything introductory comments they'd like to make before we start? Not hearing any.
I'm sorry, John. Just to introduce, Weston just joined us as well.
Oh, hi, Weston. Good.
Hey, sorry I'm late. Good to see you all.
We're fine. And I suggest we go to Tad's opening remarks next.
Great, thanks, John. This is Tad Abram, the Air Director with MDE, and I'll be real brief because I am giving a climate change and air quality update where we'll cover all the newest stuff, but a couple issues. One is we just released a very comprehensive greenhouse gas reduction plan required by law. It's to meet the 40% reduction by 2030 requirement of the law. The plan actually achieves about a 50% reduction by 2030, and if we get strong federal action, could go well above that. So I'll have a link to that in my presentation. The other one is that for those of you that are long timers, we are on the verge in Maryland of being attainment for every single federal national ambient air quality standard. We are so close on ozone, which has been our problem. And so it's in a very important year, and we don't have action items today, but we will have 2 or 3 important action items for the June meeting, and I will highlight them in my air quality and climate change update later in the agenda. So that's all I have today, John. I'm going to cover a lot of stuff in my my update later as well.
Good. We look forward to it. It sounds like fun. So I'm going to jump, just to move things along, I'm going to jump to the approval of the meeting minutes. Has everyone taken a look at the meeting minutes? You were sent them ahead of time, and you should have them. And I'm going to pause for about 2 minutes in case people want to take a quick second look at them, and then I'll ask for a motion to approve. So unless anyone has an objection, I would like to entertain a motion to approve.
I move to.
I'll just, because it's weird doing it this way. So I imagine that most people are going to be fine with them. So I'm just looking for any changes that people suggest. Not hearing any. Is there anyone that doesn't approve the minutes? Any objection to the minutes? So I'll just do a voice. All in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Aye.
Good. And we didn't hear any objections. And does anyone wish to mark it as abstained for any reason? So the minutes are approved. Thank you. And I'll turn it over to Randy to direct the rest of the meeting.
Thank you, John. We'll just be moving into our first briefing presentation this morning, and Air Director Tad Aburn.
One more thing, Randy. I'm so sorry to interrupt. But what we'll do is, we didn't see there's a bunch of other people on the line. So how should we recognize them on this call? Do we want to go through, or just have it listed later on?
We do have it listed. We could always pull that up, but since it's so few, it may be just a nice courtesy for those who joined us to just have them, or I could read off their names or have them.
Yeah, if you can read all the names that you have listed, that would be best. Please do that. It'll go faster.
Okay, Mike Woodman with MDE, Catherine Salarano with MDE, David Kramer, Eddie Durant, MDE, Eric Thinnell, MDE, Hussein Wahid, MDE, Justin Mabry, MDE, a lot of MDE, Lisa Nisley, MDE, Ryan, I assume that's our MDE. No, Ryan Mayer, EIP. That helps, thank you. Susan Nash, MDE, Tim Shepard, MDE, and Tom Weisinger, Raven. Okay. That should
Thank
be
you,
it.
and I'm sorry I messed up not doing it earlier. I sure appreciate that. And then it's such a small group. I think as questions come up, if the presenter's okay, we can take questions all along the way. And if that becomes unruly, we'll structure it. But otherwise, we'll just do it free form. And that's the end of my comment. Sorry to interrupt.
So Randy, could you go into presentation mode?
I think I'm there.
Okay, and so as John said, we can keep this real casual today, and if you have a question, feel free to to either interject or raise your hand, and Randy and Carolyn will keep eyes for people asking questions via the raise the hand and chat box tool. So we don't have action items today, but we will have probably a couple important action items at the June meeting, and part of this presentation is going to highlight some of the more important programs and some of the actions that we're going to be asking AQCAC to take for the rest of this year and into 2022. So today, we were going to provide just a really quick air quality basics refresher for some of the folks on the phone that are new, but it really doesn't sound like we need that much today. Talk a little bit about the progress we've made over the past few years and back as far as 10, 15 years on both air pollution and reducing greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. Go through some of the key programs that we're working on to continue to address air pollution and climate change, and then sort of a priorities preview for 2021 and 2022 for AQCAC. The report on the right side, Clean Air in Maryland, with the website, is available on the website. A lot of the data and information I'm going to be presenting today is included in that. We're also about to release our 2021 version of Clean Air in Maryland. We do that in Clean Air Awareness Week, which is coming up in May. So there will be a brand new updated version of our Clean Air in Maryland progress report in a month or two. So move to the next slide, please, Randy. You can move on from that slide as well. Again, I'm not sure we really need this today, but could you go back to ozone, Randy? I don't know what, it just slipped by real quick. Ground level ozone has been our toughest problem in Maryland. It's, I think most of the folks know that it's been one we've really struggled with back to the 70s. Part of the reason we really struggle with it is that our research program shows that up to 70% of our problem on any bad day originates in a state that's upwind of Maryland. So it's been hard to deal with the transport piece. But ozone is formed when nitrogen oxide and volatile organic compounds mix with sunlight. It's a photochemically formed pollutant. And so what we've learned over the past 20 years is that the key to reducing ozone in Maryland has been reducing NOx emissions. And again, ozone comes from pretty much anything that has emissions, primarily power plants and vehicles, but we also have industrial sources, and then things we call area sources, which are like painting and consumer product use. So ground level ozone continues to be the one pollutant we struggle with, but we're getting closer, and I'll go through some data in a minute. Move to fine particles, Randy. Fine particles are exactly that. They're very, very fine particles. They're a very, very significant public health risk. They're directly linked to early mortality. They also are linked to a whole host of respiratory problems. And fine particle matter is probably the riskiest air pollutant we regulate. And so again, the emissions that originate, again, there's a direct and there's an indirect part of fine particulate. So there's a photochemically formed part of fine particulate, but there's also a direct emission source part. Some of the sources are cars and trucks. Forest fires in the West are a huge source of fine particles. Factories, construction equipment. And again, the diagram on the right just tries to give you a feel for how fine is. Very, very, very small, not even possible to see particulate that gets inhaled deep into folks' lungs. So, and again, it's a real success story, and I'll be going through some of that in a minute. Next slide, please, Randy. So a little history. I mean, I think the air pollution program was started back in the days where you really could see the air pollution, smog, and there's some huge events. The Denora, PA was an event that was close to us, but we've had these events in the far past, the 50s and the 60s. London, a lot of it had to do with larger particulate, but you literally could see the air pollution, and that is when the programs got started. Luckily, we no longer, we actually have a provision in Maryland that says if you see visible air pollution, that's a problem. So to the next slide, please, Randy. Then there was a period in the early 2000s, 2000, 2005, 2010, where Maryland really took a beating because our air quality was so bad compared to other parts of the country. We had problems with both ground level ozone, and we had a real problem with fine particulate matter. A couple of the sort of classic pieces that highlighted our problems was a really famous 2005 MIT study where Maryland was identified as the riskiest place to breathe the air west of the Mississippi. In 2008, we had the unfortunate.
I guess you mean east of the Mississippi, right?
Yeah. Well, it's east of the Mississippi. Lord, how did we get that wrong? Anyway, sorry about that. 2008, we had the unfortunate. We were in the unfortunate position of being designated by EPA as having the worst ozone area anywhere outside of California and Texas. So we have had our bad days. Moving on, Randy. The good. In recent years, a lot of that has changed, and I'll go through some of the reasons why. But we have now met the fine particle standard, and we're actually far below it, and we continue to trend down. So we solved that fine particle problem. Ozone levels are still higher than the current 2015 standard, but we have met all previous standards, the 2008 standard, the 19, so we're very close on ozone, and I'll show you in a minute how close we are. And 2020 was sort of a banner year. There was a lot going on, strange weather, lockdowns, but we had the fewest number of bad ozone days ever recorded in a single year. So moving to the next slide, please, Randy. Many of you have seen these before. These are updated with the 2019 and 2020 data when we can. This is just a handy little snapshot of all of the air pollutants that we have standards for and where we are in terms of whether we're below the standard or above the standard. It's a relative chart. So if you take a look at daily fine particulate matter, it looks like we're about 35% below the standard. Ozone, we are still a little bit above the standard, but it does show a very clear trend for all of the air pollutants we regulate, showing that we are making progress, and we have reduced levels of almost all air pollutants to levels that are protective of public health across the state. We still have ozone. It is our biggest challenge. There's still more going on with it, but every year we get closer and closer. Next slide, please, Randy. So here's our snapshot of bad ozone days. And so we run a monitoring network where we have monitors throughout Maryland, generally one monitor per county in the urban areas. And you can see that the number of, the number that we're showing is actually the worst monitor each day. It's not all the monitors. So this is something that shows clear progress. The number of days have been going downward. If we went back to 2000, you would even see a more dramatic trend. So Randy, hit the button, and we have this 3 in 2020, just 3 days where at least one monitor went above the standard. And to be honest with you, on all 3 of those days, we only had 1 or 2 days or 1 monitor, 1 day was 2 monitors. So not only is the number of days, the number of monitors that are going over the standard are also going down. So we're very close. We are close enough so that the current attainment date for ozone, we're no longer a severe area. We're now a marginal area for ozone, is this year, and we were so close that we have the opportunity to get an extension until next year to see if we attain the standard. So moving to the next slide, Randy. This is just a different way to look at progress, not the number of days or how high the ozone is, but sort of the spatial risk reduction that's taken place with ozone. You know, don't worry too much about the colors. Reds and purples are bad, unhealthy, not protective of public health. Greens and yellows are much cleaner, protective of public health. So you can see a real dramatic shift in terms of our ozone problem, you know, going from what used to be a statewide problem with very high levels to now a problem that's sort of the Baltimore, Washington, Philadelphia corridor, where even the higher days of ozone are cleaner. So it's a real good way to show a pretty significant success story. We still have more work to do, and we'll talk a little bit about what we're doing in a minute to get rid of all those yellows. So next slide, please, Randy. Randy, can we move to the next slide?
Yeah, I did, Ted. You don't see it, the fine particle pollution? Move back again. You're seeing it now.
Still the same.
Still the same. Weird. Okay. Sure why that is. If you're not seeing any changes at all, I'm flipping through them.
No change.
Yeah, it seems to be stuck on the shrinking ozone problem slide. Not a bad slide, but
Let me escape out and start again. Are you seeing?
there we go.
That was slow.
It just flipped. So here is the overtime graph of worst levels of fine particle measured in the state over time, and you can see that early 2000s we were fairly high, well above the annual standard. Around 2010, we finally got below the standard, and we have continued to trend downward since that time. Every year we seem to make a little more progress, going down. So Randy, if you could hit the slide. We went the wrong way. If you could go back to the fine particles.
I have a feeling something's jumping around like you're out of sync with what I'm doing on screen.
No, okay, that's good. That's so we're back on track, I think. And we expect the fine particle levels to continue to get lower each year. And I'll talk a little bit about why in a minute. So next slide, Randy.
Work this time?
Yeah, we're on SO2. So sulfur dioxide, one of the more recent standards EPA has set was a standard for sulfur dioxide, which put Maryland in a position where we had the potential to have 3 new non-attainment areas, problem areas for sulfur dioxide. What we're showing here is a graph of the measured SO2 data around the Baltimore area, and you can see that the levels are consistently below the standard. The other 2 areas are probably never going to be designated as non-attainment because some of the major sources in those areas have decided to retire or move away from certain fuels that create SO2. So the non-attainment area that could have possibly been in the western Maryland part of the state, out by the Luke paper mill, is in the process of being determined to be in attainment, as is the area that's in the Washington, D.C. area around some of the power plants in Montgomery and in PG County. And I'll go through some of the changes that are taking place in a minute in terms of shutdowns of coal-fired power plants. So next slide, please, Randy. One of the pollutants that we don't talk about a lot, but it's a very important pollutant, is set of pollutants are toxic air pollutants, air toxics. The federal government calls them hazardous air pollutants. But we're just showing a couple summaries of some key air toxics and the downward trend. My rule of thumb is that that in general we've reduced air toxic exposure by about half over the past 20 years, and that's a good success story. Still have more to do, but we are clearly making progress reducing toxic air pollutants that people can breathe. So move to the next slide, please, Randy. So why? What's driven a lot of this progress? And again, I could spend hours going through everything, but we've just highlighted a few of the key programs that have helped us make this progress. So for stationary sources, in other words, sources that have smokestacks, the things people typically connect to air pollution, we have the 2006 Maryland Healthy Air Act, which was just a huge game changer in terms of both fine particle and ozone air pollution. The Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, RGGI, has become a cornerstone of a lot of our work. It's primarily for climate change, but it also has co-benefits for ozone and fine particles. So a regulation that some of you were involved in approving in the 2015 timeframe, a regulation of nitrogen oxides from coal-fired power plants, turned out to be very effective. And there's many, many more. When I say many, there's probably 20 or 30 other regulations we've adopted over this time frame for stationary sources that have helped move the ball in the right direction. Municipal waste combustors, cement kilns, a whole long list. So mobile sources is the second big key area, emissions that are linked to many of our air pollution issues. The 2007 Clean Cars program, when we adopted the California limits, we're going to actually have a briefing on that as part of today's agenda, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. But we've also made a lot of progress because of federal tailpipe standards. We've also done a huge amount of work reducing emissions from diesel sources, whether they're large trucks or construction equipment, but we've made a lot of progress. So some of the big hitting programs, and I'm going to go through this in a little bit more detail at the end, but the Transportation Climate Initiative is a really big initiative, primarily greenhouse gas driven, but again, huge criteria pollutant, ozone, fine particle co-benefits, and zero emission medium and heavy duty trucks. We've been working on zero emission vehicles for light duty vehicles, cars, for a long time, and we are making progress. We'll talk about that in a minute as part of the second briefing today. But a big new issue is medium and heavy duty trucks. Again, we'll have a little more on that in the second briefing today. So next slide, please. Another huge part of our progress has been our partnership with the University of Maryland and other local and sometimes regional universities. University of Maryland College Park, University of Maryland Baltimore County, Howard University, our partnership with NASA, NOAA, and NIST. It's been a 30-year effort now, and it's evolved over time to where it's very, I think you may have seen some of our work recently on how COVID, how the shutdowns have affected air quality and climate change. But it's been a huge successful effort, and our focus in Maryland has been pollution that is transported into the state from states upwind of Maryland, and it's been a very, very successful program and has really been at the heart of some of the progress we've made. Again, there's a University of Maryland RAMP website if you're interested in more detail. But our tools include everything from airplanes, ozone balloons, laser measuring technology called LIDAR, profilers, satellites, a huge effort over the past 30 years. And if you really boil it down to some of the real simple, basic conclusions from the research that drove a lot of the programs that help us make the progress. First one was the significance of pollution floating into Maryland for ozone. And the general rule of thumb, and it still holds, is that on any given bad ozone day, about 70% of Maryland's, the measured ozone we measure, about 70% of that originates in some upwind state. The second huge conclusion was that regional reductions of nitrogen oxide from power plants and vehicles and regional reductions of SO2 from power plants in Maryland and in upwind states will dramatically reduce ozone and fine particles. And it's been a formula that has worked extremely well, driving down regional NOx emissions across the east has been at the heart of the ozone success story, and reducing SO2 from power plants across the east has been at the heart of the downward trends in fine particle air pollution. The other thing that's continuing the progress for fine particle air pollution is the movement away from coal as the primary fuel for creating electricity to moving in the direction of natural gas and renewable energy. And so we expect the fine particle levels to continue to drop as the electricity generating fleet continues to move to cleaner or renewable fuels. So next slide, please, Randy. A lot of folks have seen these. These are I told you the Maryland Healthy Air Act was a huge game changer, and this just shows you the nitrogen oxide reductions over time. You can see a dramatic drop around 2009 when the Maryland Healthy Air Act kicked in. Randy, next slide.
Next slide, it's showing SO2 now.
I'm still seeing the nitrogen oxide bar chart.
I'm going to cut it out and try to reconnect again. Sometimes that seems to help. Did that do anything?
I'm still seeing the NOx slide. Is that what everybody else is seeing?
Yes.
Randy, I don't know if you have your video on, but if you do, you might want to turn that off.
I don't, thank you. But I could just be having a hang up on my end. I can change the presenter if that makes it easier. Maybe Karen having better internet today.
We can try that if you want, yeah.
Okay, I'm switching. Karen, do you have your presentation up? You want me to switch now? Just let me know.
Sure,
Well, for the sake of time, I'll continue until we catch up. We have seen similar dramatic reductions in SO2 emissions from coal-fired power plants because of the Healthy Air Act, and even more dramatic reduction than we showed for nitrogen oxide. The law worked very well. Sulfur dioxide emissions from coal-fired power plants in Maryland dropped dramatically. The reason the SO2 reductions are important is that SO2 is the primary pollutant that gives us fine particle air pollution. So when you reduce SO2 emissions, you reduce fine particle levels. And Carolyn's got it back up. So it was right around this time that we started to see, we basically came into attainment of the PM standard in the 2010 to 2012 time frame. So dramatic reductions, the Healthy Air Act worked extremely well. There were reductions of SO2 going on in upwind states at the same time because of federal rules. And so it really drove us to meeting the fine particle standards. So next slide, Carolyn. We also have a lot of change going on right now with coal-fired power plants across Maryland. Again, I mentioned that a lot of electricity is now generated with natural gas and renewable energy. And because of that, coal-fired power plants are beginning to make plans to retire. And this is just a list of the units in Maryland that are scheduled for retirement between now and 2027. And basically, we're on the verge of moving away from coal as a fuel, and because of that, a lot of units are in the process of retiring. We will continue to see gas and oil-fired units with some of these facilities, but the coal units are generally in the process of being retired. Next slide, please, Randy or Carolyn. Just a snapshot of the mobile source reductions, not as dramatic as the reductions from coal-fired power plants, but equally important. This slide shows reductions in the key pollutants, NOx, fine particles, VOCs. So we've also seen downward trends in emissions from mobile sources, and that's also been a big part of why we've seen reduced air pollution. Next slide, Carolyn. So climate change, I wanted to at least have a few slides talking about some of the things we're doing and some of the critical work we've accomplished. So next slide, Carolyn. In Maryland, we've had two versions of a law to reduce greenhouse gas emissions across the state. In 2009, the original Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act was established. It required a 25% reduction by 2020. We pretty much have achieved that. The second updated version of the law was a 2016 update, which upped the ante to 40% reduction from 2006 levels by 2030. We have just released the plan to get us to that 2030 goal. And not only does it appear to be getting us to a 40% reduction by 2030, it's getting us very close to a 50% reduction by 2030. The final plan is huge. The link there is a link that gets you to the plan, the final plan. Over 100 measures, everything from planting trees to power plant controls to zero emission vehicles. It also includes a huge amount of economic analysis. I will mention that there is a new law moving through the General Assembly right now, the Climate Solutions Now Act. It will strengthen, it will add new urgency to reducing greenhouse gas emissions if it passes this year. It will probably push towards the 60% reduction by 2030 kind of target. And one of the things that we're doing right now is we're looking at our current plan gets us 50% by 2030. That was in a period where the federal government did not appear to be moving forward with strong federal national rules. If we would get a total turnaround because of the new administration, we're looking at how far would that get us? Would that get us close to that 60% target? We still think the 60% target is very aggressive and it's going to require a lot of work, but we are looking at a strong federal program as a part of that. I mean, we in Maryland, we have difficulty, we can't by law regulate things like airplanes, railroads, marine engines, and so we do need a really strong federal partner if we're going to get to a really deep reduction goal. The new law and our plan shows that the ultimate goal, which is something like carbon neutrality by 2045, that we are moving in that direction. Right now, our plan does not get us all the way there. I'll show you in a minute, but it is something we also look at. Next slide, please, Carolyn. So here's sort of a quick and dirty view of where our different plans were going to take us or will get us. The top light blue line is a do nothing scenario where you can see downward trends, but also trending upwards. The 2019 plan, which is the 25% reduction by 2020 plan, it shows that it got us to that 25 by 20, but that it was going to eventually get us to something like a 60% reduction in 2050. The green line is the current plan. It shows that we're at about a 50% cut by 2030, and we are approaching an 80+% kind of cut by 2050. Our ultimate goal is that net zero by 2045 target that's shown on the slide. So we still have a lot more work to do, but we are making progress. Next slide. One of the unique features of our law in Maryland is that it clearly says that the job is not only to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but the job is also to do it in a way that has a positive impact on Maryland's economy, and it has a positive impact on creating jobs in Maryland. And if you're a person that really appreciates this kind of analysis and work, take a look at our plan, because it's really high-end work that we've done on both economics and jobs and greenhouse gas emission reductions. I won't go through all the numbers, but it does show net positive impacts on jobs, GDP, public health co-benefits, and cost of carbon climate change benefits are listed as well. So feel free to take a look. It's a very good piece of our work. We do have consultants, or we have folks that help us do this work. Towson University's Regional Economic Studies Institute, and a group called E3 out of California who does a lot of California's work as well. So next slide, please. So what are the upcoming hot topics for air quality, and how do they link to what AQCAC would do? So this is going to be real quick. I'm going to try to go through a lot in a couple minutes, but climate change continues to be our hottest area. It's an area that we're really pushing hard on. And so we're still doing a lot of the analysis I showed you. We're still doing it. We actually have a mid-course report due in 2022. So even though we're finished with the plan, we immediately have more work to do. We have the new law to be looking at as well. And again, we're looking really at what a strong federal program might do to help us get to those very deep long-term goals. We are looking at coming up with benefits from individual programs. The tools that we use capture the synergies between programs, so it looks at all the programs as if they're a packet. It doesn't generally say this program gave you this program gave you that, and there's a good reason for that. These programs do work synergistically together, but we've been asked to do a lot of that work on individual programs, so we're doing that for some of the priorities. We also have a lot of our climate commission activities still going on, our mitigation working group, where one of the big pieces is a buildings plan. We also have the medium and heavy duty ZEV action plan that we're working on this year. So if you can mute your voice, we'd appreciate it. I think we're getting some interference. So if you can go on mute now, that would be great. So again, we have this mid-course progress report due in 2022, and actually the year after that, depending. We have a law that may pass. In 2023 or 2022, the legislature must decide whether we keep the program or whether we stop working on the program. So it's a sunset. We have the new legislation. It's a big deal. We have the Climate Commission. It's a very active process, a huge chunk on our webpage dedicated to the commission's work. A bipartisan, very balanced commission supported by 4 working groups. And one of the big things that AQCAC has been involved with has been our focus on short-lived climate pollutants. These are what we would sometimes simply refer to as super pollutants. It's very, very potent greenhouse gases, methane, hydrofluorocarbons, HFCs. We've adopted rules for 2 of those this year, and we're now working on landfills, natural gas distribution, and wastewater treatment plants are coming in the future. Next slide, Randy. So some of the recent activities. AQCAC approved 2 actions: a prohibition on the use of certain hydrofluorocarbons, HFCs, and a regulation to control leaking methane from the natural gas industry, compressor stations, and related equipment. Both were huge efforts. AQCAC played a very important role. The HFC regulation is now adopted on November 2nd. The natural gas compressor station rule was adopted on November 16th. So both these rules are on law and being implemented. So next slide, please, Carolyn. And we thank AQCAC for their action on that. Next steps on short-lived climate pollutants. One of the big ones is the natural gas distribution system. This is the distribution system that gets the natural gas to people's houses or to businesses. We are working with some of the big folks that are already working on reducing leaking methane through upgrading natural gas distribution infrastructure. And so we will be bringing this to AQCAC probably over the next year, the 2020-2021 timeframe. The one that we're currently working with stakeholders on is minimizing leaking methane emissions from landfills. I think we shared in the past some of the research that shows methane plumes coming off of some of the larger landfills, and it is an area that we're working very hard on. We do have a stakeholder meeting coming up soon. I thought we might be able to announce it, but it's in the next month or two. It's a very important rule, but it's also very, it's fairly complicated and can be costly. So it's one on the agenda. It's the next one up, and then after that, it'll be natural gas distribution systems. So next slide, please, Carolyn. So moving away from climate change and moving into ozone, probably the biggest thing we continue to work on is transport pollution that is floating from other states into Maryland. Right now we have a petition into EPA through the Ozone Transport Commission called a Section 184C petition, and it focuses on Pennsylvania power plants that operate under a cap and trade program or a rack rule with long-term averaging, and so they are not required to run their pollution controls on every single day, and sometimes they don't run their pollution controls well on the days that actually matter for ozone, which seems crazy, but that's how it's working. So we're very, the 184C petition is something EPA is actually working on right now. They have a public comment period that closes soon. We're going to be submitting comments. We'll see where they go with that. We also have an update of the cross-state air pollution called CASPR. That is going to be finalized next week, or maybe today. I think it's going to be finalized today. And it will clearly help make more progress. It's a federal rule that ratchets down on the cap and trade budgets. It still doesn't get at the issue of making sure that people run their controls on the days that actually matter the most, but it will dramatically help us with our ozone problem. And there's a piece that's hanging out there called Good Neighbor SIPs. Each state is supposed to have a state implementation plan, a SIP, that shows how it's going to reduce its emissions in its state to be a good neighbor, to reduce any significant contribution coming from Maryland into New Jersey or Pennsylvania into Maryland. So the other piece that's sort of exciting is we're going to take a long, you never know because the weather's a big part of ozone, but if we get average weather, we have a real chance of measuring attainment for ozone for the first time ever in Maryland in 2021. So I don't want to jinx myself because weather can have such a clear role in high ozone, but we have a real chance in 2021. Municipal waste combustors, we're working on some upgrades to permits and regulations for those. We also have the aftermarket catalyst rule, which AQCAC has already looked at, and we're moving forward with that. But it also appears that the federal government may finally be thinking about fixing some of those issues. So we're going to get at that one way or another. Sulfur dioxide, like I said earlier, we're working on 3 different areas. We're working to wrap up the attainment demo processes for all 3 areas, and so that's good news. Next slide, or hit the button. I think didn't come in. Mobile sources are probably our biggest area. Really the hottest topic that we're working on for both ozone, air pollution, and greenhouse gases. We have a program called the Medium and Heavy Duty ZEV MOU, huge priority. We'll talk about that a little bit in the second presentation as well. A program called the Transportation Climate Initiative. It's basically trying to take the concept behind RGGI, which is cap and invest, and to use it to reduce emissions from the transportation sector, not the power plant sector. So it's in the works. We're continuing to support the process, and there's going to be a lot going on with the Transportation Climate Initiative. Electric vehicles is another huge priority. Again, we will be bringing regulations to AQCAC occasionally to upgrade our electric vehicle for small car light duty vehicle program. Again, we have an opportunity coming up for other clean car initiatives, clean truck initiatives. The Clean Air Act has a provision that says, several provisions that says in the United States, there are only 2 options for cars and trucks. One is the federal program, the other is the California program. States can use Section 177 of the Clean Air Act to opt into the California program. That's what we did in 2007 for light duty vehicles. There's a lot of opportunities coming up to look at the California program for medium and heavy duty trucks. We're also going to be looking at an issue called anti-tampering. It's basically something that's emerged over the past few years. It's people or businesses who are tampering with the control equipment on cars and trucks and larger trucks. So next slide, please, Carolyn. All those identify a few of the AQCAC opportunities. Anti-tampering is probably one of the hottest issues going on right now. I think everybody heard of the Volkswagen problems, where Volkswagen broke the law and played with tampered with vehicles' emissions systems, big penalties. That money was used to do a lot of clean air work. The mitigation fund from that lawsuit. So the issue of tampering is probably something that 5 years ago I would have said is important, but not a huge issue. I think we've learned a lot over the past few years, and it's actually a much larger problem than we, the states and EPA, understood. And so it's a huge priority right now. EPA has estimated that up to 58,000 tons of NOx per year in the Marramas states, that's the mid-Atlantic states, is released because of tampering. So it's something we're taking very seriously. We will be bringing a regulation to AQCAC in June on this tampering issue. We already have good authority to begin implementing this program, but we want to put a regulation in place that makes it very, very clear what's allowed and what's not allowed. So that'll be a really high priority for the June AQCAC meeting. And again, we plan to have an announcement of this initiative in the April or May timeframe. It's basically a compliance enforcement program, but we're also going to be doing an outreach and education effort linked to it as well. So next slide, please. So again, more priorities. One of the really, really high priorities for us this year is environmental justice. There's a couple big issues going on. One is an issue of hyper local air monitoring projects. We now have 4 of them going on at some stage in Maryland, one in Baltimore, one in Cheverly, one in St. Mary's County, and one that's just being put together in the DC area, DC and some of the surrounding counties. I'll give an example of a hyper local monitoring effort in a minute. We also have a new MDE-wide process for environmental justice that is now just being implemented. It's going to be a real enhancement to what we've done in the past. A part of that is community partnerships. I think some of you know that we in the AIR program at MDE had begun to build partnerships with 9 communities. We actually invested into some diesel cleanup and worked in partnership on at least one hyper-local monitoring network with a community. That will now be blended in the MDE-wide effort. And we're also going to be having a lot of initiatives focusing on making sure that as part of what we do with permits and what we do with compliance, that environmental justice is now a really critical piece to making sure how we do that work. Another really high priority are some of our partnerships, our non-regulatory pieces, but we have a very good partnership with the port, MDE, MDOT, MEA, 15 different communities, a whole lot of money invested into diesel cleanup over the past 5 years, even more to be invested in the future. A program that's sort of in the background, but one that I think is really important, is we have a voluntary peak day partnership program. It's now in its 4th year. We basically working with about 40 stationary sources that affect the Baltimore area, the Washington area, and the Philadelphia area. And on days where we think ozone is going to be a real problem, we push these partners to actually go above and beyond their regulatory limits, to do more, to reduce NOx even more than they're required to do by law. So again, it's if anybody's ever interested, we got some briefings on that. It's a very interesting, innovative program. So, but it's really important because ozone is highest on just 5, 10, 15 days in the summer. And so if we can get extra effort on those days, it might be the difference between making it and not making it. So next slide, please. This is an example of a hyper-local air monitoring project. This is actually one we're working with Johns Hopkins and Yale on. It's called the Search Project. And on the right, you can see where Hopkins has set up air quality sensors. Air quality sensors are low-cost air monitoring equipment that has become very available and has improved in quality over the past few years. Not as good as our regulatory monitors, our federal reference monitors that we put up, but our monitors cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, and these sensors cost $100. So it's very interesting. One of the issues that we're trying to look at is the variability across a region. We have basically one monitor per county. So what's going on in between, and that's what we're looking at. And it's got these projects very much have a focus on communities, overburdened communities, environmental justice areas. So we have similar projects that are underway in Cheverly and St. Mary's County, and there will be a similar project going on in around the Washington, D.C. area at some point in the future. But it's very interesting and exciting stuff. So port partnership, I mentioned this earlier. This is a really successful effort. The port, MDE, MDOT, MEA, all, 15 to 20 community partners, Turner Station, St. Helena, North Point, Fort Howard. Our work with AIR has been focusing on diesel emission reductions, and we've seen a lot of positive reductions in diesel emissions because of this partnership. There are other issues, however, that the port works on with communities, things like dredging. So it's a really successful effort. There's good write-ups on the port's webpage, so take a look if you wanted. Through 2020, we've invested over $10 million into reducing emissions of nitrogen oxide and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Also significant reductions in toxics emissions. The collaboration with communities continues, and over the next 10 years, I think we will significantly outspend what we did. The $10 million is just the start. I think there's more coming over the next 10 years. So next slide, please. Some of the future on diesel. We have done community projects, one in Turner Station, one in Curtis Bay. We have VW projects in and around the port in the North Point area, repowering tugs, a whole host of projects that are coming for the future. We have private sector partners around the port who are also now have taken advantage of some of the VW funding and are doing some work on their own. Locomotive switchers, electric cranes, diesel buses, huge investments over time. And then there's the Volkswagen settlement. The funding that came from the Volkswagen settlement has allowed us to do a whole lot of things, including school buses, transit buses, again, large NOx reductions and significant investments being made. So next slide, please. That's it for the overview. I probably tried to cram too much into a relatively short presentation. So I'd be happy to take questions, or if folks have a discussion, be happy to have that kind of discussion. So John, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you. I think we need to check in now and again and remind us of the big overall plan. And you always do an excellent job. And I actually go back and look at the presentations later. So make sure everyone has a copy of that. And I know we got it already, but if you can remind people where it's at, and if people want to refer back to it, because this council has been very good and very focused on helping you with your improvements, but we have to have the updates to enable us to be good at it. So thank you, Tad. I thought it was wonderful. But I will ask anyone on the council, if they have questions or comments, please jump right in.
Yeah, John, this is John Coe. Tad, thanks for all the great news. It's really a great story. What's your view on the prospects for the Biden EPA revisiting the PM and ozone NACs that the Trump EPA decided to retain? And what kind of time frame would you see for that?
Yeah, I think they will. I think there will be a revisitation of both those standards. And I think the time frame will be within the next couple years for both of them. You got to remember, EPA is generally on a 5-year, every 5-year schedule to update standards, whether there was a change in administration or not. So I think EPA is going to move more quickly this time than just waiting for the 5 years. So the good news is that given what I know, I'm not an epidemiologist or a health professional, but the downward trend that we continue to see with fine particles in Maryland will probably indicate that indicates that we will actually be below a new fine particulate matter standard if it's set at a tougher level. Ozone is one of our big continued problems, and so we do expect at some point EPA to consider lowering the ozone standard. I think one of the things we've been arguing is we generally think we need to follow the science. So if a lower standard is needed, that's what we need to have. But as part of that same sentence, we've been saying, but we will need a stronger federal program on transport if we're gonna lower the ozone standard, because again, in Maryland and other East Coast states, 50, 70, Delaware, 95% of their problems comes from somewhere outside of Delaware. So I think it'll happen in the next couple years, but at least for the ozone piece, it's got to be complemented with a stronger federal program on transport. And I think if you read some of the air pollution news, you've seen that EPA has recently announced that they're going to be moving forward with another air pollution transport rule beyond Casper. So good question. Thank you, John.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Ted.
Ted, this is Tom Killeen. I just wanted to ask a question. You had mentioned earlier on in your report that 70% of the pollutants in Maryland come from outside of Maryland, and you just touched on it with Delaware. Do we happen to know where they come from? I mean, is it just the neighboring states, or is it further afield? Would it be West Virginia, Ohio, Pennsylvania, or is it further out, or do we even know? The reason I asked this because you said, you had this good neighbor policy. So if it comes further afield than just right in our region, then that seems like there could be a problem that kind of persists.
Yeah, so that's another great question. I think you can, we have, between EPA and the states, we do have criteria for identifying the most important states that contribute to each area. And it does change by area. So for Maryland, the most important states are Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Ohio, Kentucky, and I'm missing one more. Anybody want to help me? So again, if you had, no, not Tennessee. The three most important states to Maryland are Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Ohio. So we do that. There are smaller contributions from states further away, states like Tennessee or even Texas. But the way the law works, the good neighbor piece of the law works, is there's a cut point, and so the states I've mentioned are going to have good neighbor plans to show that they've reduced any significant contribution to Maryland. And Maryland will have to have a good neighbor plan to show how it is reducing its contribution to states like New Jersey and New York. So we are a contributor, but I think our record on our programs is pretty good. So, but it's a big piece, and I don't think it was, the concept of ozone grew up in California. And the meteorology and geography in California are just different. And so, LA's problem has a lot to do with emissions in LA. And what we've learned in the East is that, for Maryland and Delaware and Connecticut, it's partially a local problem, but there's a huge part of it that's regional transport. So in Maryland and Connecticut and Delaware, our strategy has always been to push the envelope as hard as we can on local controls, but also push the envelope through legal action on trying to get EPA to level the playing field between us and the states upwind of it. So it continues to be a big priority for us. And so the 184C petition that's going on right now is a legal action, and we'll see where it goes. And the good neighbor SIPs will be another interesting piece to follow over the next couple of years. So it's a big issue for us, especially if there's a new tougher ozone standard.
Now, this is Bob Wright. We've had the pandemic, and so there's been less traffic on the road, and to a certain extent, less manufacturing. So it's good news that we're moving to almost attainment with the ozone. But do you think that the pandemic actually helped us move that way? Has any thinking been done to suggest that when the pandemic is over and we go back to whatever normal is going to be, that it will be a much bigger challenge than what we think?
That's a great question. And I think 2020 was a very interesting year. Clearly, the shutdown, the reduced traffic had something to do with the lower ozone in the Mid-Atlantic. But it was also an interesting year weather-wise. And so, so that had a role. But most importantly is that the downward trend in lower ozone that we've been seeing over the past 10 years is also clearly driven by regulatory programs that phase in over time. And so when you have power plant control programs that phase in over time and vehicle programs, so we think the lockdown clearly had a role, but it wasn't the primary driver. One of the really interesting things with the COVID and the lockdown was that we did see lower ozone in Maryland, and we think we can link it to the reduced transportation emissions. But other areas like Chicago and New York and California had similar reduced emissions from the transportation sector, but did not see the same kind of ozone reduction that we did in the Mid-Atlantic. And I don't know if Ross is on the phone, but part of the reason behind that is that some of those areas like LA and Chicago and New York, they have not reached what we call the tipping point. So in the Mid-Atlantic, what's happened is that we've done enough control programs so that we changed the actual chemistry in the air above the Mid-Atlantic. So a ton of NOx reductions in the Mid-Atlantic gets us more ozone benefit than a ton of NOx reductions in New York City because the chemistry is different. And so when you reduce mobile source emissions and you take some of the NOx out of the air, it helped in Maryland, but it didn't help as much in LA, Chicago, New York, and some of the other areas. There's still too much NO2 in the air and the chemistry doesn't work as well. And so that's good for us. That means every ton of NOx reduction we make around the Mid-Atlantic is gonna give us these supercharged ozone benefits, which is a good thing. So the other areas are not quite as close as we are, and the reductions sometimes don't work as well. So I've probably got a little more complicated than folks wanted, but yes, we have seen benefits from COVID. We don't think it's the only thing. John, we're going to be watching this year because the other thing I mentioned earlier in the slide presentation was there's quite a few power plants that have retired over the last year, not just in Maryland, but outside of Maryland. And we think that's going to also have a role in helping us maybe attain the standard in this. I don't want to jinx myself, but we have a good shot at attaining the standard for the first time ever this year. So we'll see how it goes.
Hey, Tad, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt with the council, but it goes along with that frame of thought. We did have a question from Dave Kramer with regards to, can Maryland have any ozone exceedance days this summer but still attain the standard?
Yes, we can. And again, I don't want to get into too complicated a description, but the way attainment with the standard is determined is you take a look at every single monitor in the state. You take 3 years of data, so it's the latest 3 years, and then you actually average the fourth highest value from each of those 3 years. And if you're below the standard, then you've attained at that standard. And you have to have every monitor show attainment. So yes, we could have more than one day of. It depends on the monitor. It depends on the levels, and so. But yes, it can work that you can have an exceedance day and still attain the standard.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
Yeah, just a couple things. And it's really impressive, all the improvements that have been made. But I just want to make a comment. Maybe this is late. It comes from the minutes from the last time. I was unable to come to that June meeting, which they're talking about the catalytic converters. And I guess I was just troubled that they decided to remove the trigger states, because I am interested. I kind of represent forestry and agriculture, and I think some of those things have real business implications. That for Maryland businesses in terms of, since we have such close borders with places like Pennsylvania and Virginia, getting catalytic converters elsewhere. And I know that was discussed when we had an initial discussion about that. Lord knows when that was, year or two ago. I don't know. So I'll just state that, and I was unable to attend that meeting, but I don't know if there's any way to acknowledge that in the minutes, because I wasn't there, but I just think it doesn't consider some of the business implications. And the other thing I'll just say is that a lot of the increases in improvements in air quality have come as a result of converting to natural gas. But again, it always troubles me that the sourcing that natural gas, we don't allow a lot of that in Maryland. We don't allow fracking. There's been a lot of contention over pipelines that will carry natural gas, and maybe that's beyond the purview of this committee, but I'll just state it for what it is that there's vast improvements made, but it's not acknowledged, and in terms of the impacts on actually transferring that material, it's not coming from Maryland, which has again business implications, especially for people in Western Maryland. And and Tad mentioned the improvements in water air quality in Western Maryland, but that was the result of 675 direct jobs, and I know sensitive to that, but it's a big deal to the forest industry and to out there. It's huge. It's devastated the economy. And just finally, I've been involved with a lot of biomass things with wood energy, and I know I'm familiar with the greenhouse gas reduction plan, and I know that in there is the use of biomass. Biomass is, in a sustainable forestry, it's considered carbon neutral, and I've been to Europe, I've been to other places, and other places in the States where they're meeting a lot of their greenhouse gas reduction targets with by using biomass for thermal energy. And I'll just make note that there's improvements in air quality as a result of using natural gas over oil, for sure. But again, it adds carbon to the atmosphere, and the use of biomass for thermal generation is efficient and is carbon neutral. So I think if we're really thinking about the real long term, as some of this develops, is that to look as biomass as a way that actually reduces the carbon pool, so because you're not using natural gas. So whatever, and there are bills in the legislature now to encourage that, but again, a lot of environmental resistance and not the acknowledgement that considering this problems with putting it in RPS. So those are just a few comments I just wanted to make in terms of business friendliness, of some of these things, and considering that, as well as this trade-off between natural gas, I think, and again, as a person who's been interested in trying to encourage adoption of high efficiency, computer controlled, high technology, commercial wood energy. So I'll just state that for what it is, for the record. But great progress. I mean, I don't mean to spell any of it. I'm just saying that.
No, John, thank you for your comments, and I'll at least touch on a couple of them. One is you mentioned the aftermarket catalyst concerns that you have because of Maryland perhaps potentially moving ahead without its neighbors.
And I brought that up and we had that discussion.
Yes, I remember that, and so we will note that in the minutes. But also, I think one of the things that we're enthused about is that it appears that EPA may be moving in the direction of making the aftermarket catalyst program a national effort and not a state-by-state effort, which when we did the briefing on aftermarket catalyst, we said that's our preference. Our preference is to have a national program because of the competitiveness issues and because of the cross-border cost issues. So that one is something we're looking at, and I mentioned that we're hoping EPA moves quickly. The issue of natural gas and biomass and renewables is perhaps one of the hottest topics that we continue to work on as part of our climate change work. And so there's a huge amount of effort in our mitigation work group looking at issues like that. So, and again, a lot of it has to do with the sort of the glide path of moving from where we are to renewables and the role of natural gas and biomass in that. So feel free to get engaged. I know a couple folks on the advisory council are also on our mitigation working groups. So take a look and get engaged. It's a huge issue. It's clearly a lot of strong opinions on from all sorts of different directions. So anyway, thanks for your comments.
Yeah, I'll just say that, I mean, again, MDE there's been a number of meetings with the forestry community and others between MDE, and I think there's been a lot of, encouragement, a lot of positive change on that aspect. But there is a ways to go, I think, with the environmental community in terms of education, that issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Time to move on to the next presentation, I would suggest, and then we can come back and have a longer discussion on other things later if we like. Is that suit you, Randy?
Yes, thank you. I was just going to propose the same thing. I know it's always difficult for us to consider how much conversation we're going to have on each topic, but we're a bit over right now.
Can I just ask that Lita put in a question in the comment that's been in there for a while. We haven't addressed it.
Oh, good. Thank you for saying that. I can't.
Yeah, she had mentioned, Tad, with the school bus issue, she just wanted to make sure that idling at schools is addressed. It's a very bad issue for children's lungs.
Totally agree. We actually have something called the Idle Free Maryland program, which I didn't mention, probably should have. We have a website on it, and we actually have a lot of activities supporting schools in dealing with the idling issue at schools. It's also a big issue with the trucking industry. So again, idling is a major issue for us, but we're working on it. So Lita, thank you.
All right, let's jump into the next presentation if we can.
Okay, I think I'm going to do a few introductory comments, maybe the first 3 or 4 slides, and then I'm going to hand it off to my expert, Justin Mabry. So why don't I mentioned this in the preview that medium and heavy duty trucks are a really high, really significant area. Some really significant emission reductions are possible. It's a challenging area, but it's one where there's a lot of activity. So next slide, please, Carolyn. Uh-oh.
Hey, hold on. It seems to be frozen. There, this is slide.
Yes. We're good. So I'll start off with on July 14th of this year, Governor Hogan signed a memorandum of understanding on medium and heavy duty zero emission vehicles called the ZEV, the medium heavy duty ZEV MOU. Includes 15 states and the District of Columbia. Some new actors in there, North Carolina, Pennsylvania. It does build off of the success of a 2013 MOU that focused on light duty vehicles, cars. This one now focuses on medium and heavy duty trucks. It commits us to work together to get a self-sustaining market for zero emission vehicle, for medium and heavy duty zero emission vehicles. It's very aggressive. It's been a big deal. It does push for 30% of the new truck and bus fleet to be ZEVs by 2030 and 100% by 2050. It has a focus on making sure that the benefits of the electrification of this part of the fleet are targeting benefits everywhere, but also focusing on underserved or disadvantaged communities. And there will be a an action plan that comes out somewhere in the fall or winter of this year that spells out exactly how we're going to meet these goals. And so I know a lot of you are, or some of you may be involved in our stakeholder process on this particular issue. It's one to keep your eyes on. It's extremely important. So next slide, please. So this will just give you a feel for why it's important. This is the greenhouse gas emissions in the Northeast, and you can see how significant medium and heavy duty vehicles are. Move to the next slide, we'll show you the same thing for NOx. If you take a look at the bottom bars, which are the 2017 emissions of nitrogen oxide, you can see that the largest bar is light duty vehicles, cars. But the next two up are medium and heavy duty trucks, on-road and non-road equipment. So it has now gotten to the point where the emissions from this sector are bigger than industrial and bigger than power plants. And so we still got work to do with cars, but we also have work to do with medium and heavy duty trucks. So moving to the next slide, please. I mentioned this earlier, but all vehicles have to be built to meet one of two sets of regulatory standards: the federal standards implemented by EPA, or standards that are set by California, specifically the California Air Resources Board. California is the only state under the Clean Air Act allowed to establish their own vehicle emission standards. However, Section 177 of the Clean Air Act allows other states to opt in to adopt the California emission standards as long as what we're opting into is identical to California. The bottom line is the Clean Air Act says you can only have two kinds, can't have a third vehicle. So a little history, the Clean Car Program, which has been in place in Maryland since 2007, it affects cars, light duty cars and trucks. Basically requires that vehicles sold in Maryland be the cleanest allowed by law. It set emission standards for criteria pollutants like nitrogen oxide and volatile organic chemicals, but also greenhouse gases. The Clean Car Program also has a technology forcing component where certain numbers of zero emission vehicles must be provided by car manufacturers over time. So we did use Section 177 of the Clean Air Act. We did adopt the Clean Car Program in 2007. It pretty much incorporated the California program by reference, and we began to implement it with the model year 2011. We do update the regulation occasionally. These all go through AQCAC, so you are probably familiar with the updates that we do to the Clean Car Program. It's now a common activity. The program has worked very well, and we've seen significant emission reductions. So moving into California medium and heavy duty trucks, I'm going to hand this off to Justin, who has been spending a lot of time following what's going on in California and potential opportunities for Maryland in the future. So Justin, I'm going to go on mute and I'm going to hand it off to you.
Okay, thank you, Doug. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so as we just heard, Thad told you about California's light duty emission standards. California also has their own vehicle emission standards for the medium and heavy duty sector. And there have been times throughout the years where California's standards have aligned with the EPA's vehicle standards, be that the light duty or the medium duty. And there are times that California has been ahead of EPA on stringency. And right now they are looking to push forward with emission reductions ahead of EPA's schedule. And MDE did not adopt California's medium and heavy duty standards when it adopted the ones for the light duty vehicles. But CARB is developing 2 regulations that will strengthen the emissions requirements for these types of vehicles, which are vehicles with a gross vehicle weight rating, or GVWR, over 8,500 pounds, and it includes the Class 2B through Class 8 vehicles. The advanced clean truck regulation is similar to the zero emission vehicle requirement for light duty vehicles and requires a growing percentage of vehicles sold in California or whatever state adopts this particular regulation to be zero emission. And the heavy duty omnibus regulation focuses on reducing criteria pollutants from the trucks with an emphasis on NOx emission reductions specifically. Next slide, please. I want to put this slide in here just to help give an idea of the type of vehicles that are being regulated under these 2 standards. Everything from Class 2B and up is covered, and Class 2B starts at the 8,500 mark. Class 2 encompasses 6,000 pounds to 10,000 pounds, and they divided it Class 2A and 2B, and 2B is 8,500 pounds and up. So that would be like your step vans and your larger minibuses. And moving on up from there to include things like walk-in vans, delivery trucks, your larger bucket trucks, school and transit buses would be covered under this as well. Refuse haulers, tow trucks, dump trucks, and finally, some of the largest vehicles, your combination tractor trailers that pull large cargo containers. As you can see, there are a wide range of vehicles that have very different use cases. And I'm sure it required a lot of work to develop regulations that can be implemented across them all to capture the desired emission reductions, because it's not a one size fits all for these type of vehicles. Next slide, please. The first regulation we want to talk about is the Advanced Clean Truck, or ACT. California has finalized the regulations that require the growing percentage of truck sales to be zero emission, and they have been sent to the Office of Administrative Law for final approval in California, and that is expected to be done in the next month or 2. ZEV sales are phased in beginning with the 2024 model year and will increase through 2035. The different weight classes have different ZEV percentage requirements, and the lowest class, the 2B through 3, will begin at 5% and increase to 55% by 2035. The class 4 through 8 will begin at 9% and increase to 75% by 2035. And these will be more of your buses, your delivery vehicles that tend to have shorter routes and operate out of more of a central location that they return to after every shift, and are more conducive to this type of vehicle technology right now. The class 7 through 8 tractors are the ones that, as I mentioned earlier, haul cargo trailers, and they tend to have longer range needs and don't necessarily return to a set location every night. This class is what the sleeper cab trucks are in that you might see pulled off on an interstate or at a truck stop when their driving shift is over. These begin at 5% and increase to only 40% by 2032, where they will remain flat then on. Next slide, please. The ACT regulation will use a similar credit banking system that the light duty manufacturers use to meet compliance. This allows the vehicle manufacturers to trade excess credits that they earn in a year or bank those credits for use in later years when the requirements increase. It provides a number of flexibilities that the manufacturers want and need to meet these requirements. And we've determined that MDE has the authority to adopt the ACT through incorporation by reference, much the same way that we did for the light duty clean cars programs when it was adopted. Next slide, please. As for the heavy duty omnibus regulation, as I mentioned before, it primarily focuses on reducing NOx emissions, and while it is not yet finalized, California is targeting a 90% reduction in tailpipe NOx emissions, going from the current 0.2 gram NOx per base horsepower hour to 0.02 grams NOx. California is also updating the testing requirements to ensure that the real-world emissions that we see from the trucks better reflect what the regulatory standards are. The regulations will also lengthen the existing emission warranty periods for these vehicles to better reflect the like the longevity and usage of modern trucks. These diesel trucks can often run for over 1 million miles, and CARB wants to try to match the warranty requirements to that to ensure that long-term emission reductions even as the vehicles age. The regulations have a phase-in period of 75% reduction to 0.05 grams for 2024 through 2026, and expects that the full reductions will start in 2027. California anticipates the regulation will be proposed toward the end of summer, and hopefully they will have it adopted by the end of the year. Next slide, please. The last regulation that we wanted to talk about is a bit further on the horizon, but we still wanted to include it just to give some perspective of what actions California is taking and what's happening throughout the entire transportation sector. Clean Cars 2 program, it's still early. Oh my God. It's still early in development, and CARB is basing the regulations off of their governor's executive order from September of last year that put a goal of 100% light-duty ZEVs by 2035. Right now, CARB anticipates proposing the rule late this year and holding a board hearing in June of 2022, with the regulation taking effect in the 2027 model year. Next slide, please. Okay, so this next slide touches on the trucking industry and other stakeholders. The trucking industry has been involved, but they are cautious, especially about the ACT and its ZEV requirement. There are concerns about the increased vehicle cost, infrastructure requirements to recharge or power these vehicles, and even vehicle availability, which at this time is there's not a whole lot of options, and they're not building them in the quantities quite necessary at this point. But the Maryland Motor Truck Association did send a letter to Governor Hogan last November expressing some of these concerns about the medium and heavy duty ZEV MOU, and as well about the Transportation and Climate Cap and Invest initiative. Other industries are supportive, but they have similar concerns as the trucking industry. Much like we've had to do for light duty vehicles, transitioning to a zero emission trucking fleet would require incentives and investment in infrastructure. The infrastructure to support these vehicles will be much greater than what has been needed for the light duty vehicles so far, and these vehicles themselves will have a greater incremental cost than light duty ZEVs have compared to conventional vehicles. However, the reduced fuel and maintenance costs that are projected to come from these vehicles will help bridge that gap, but the upfront cost is still going to be an issue for some time. And as for the NOx omnibus regulation, it's much less concerning for the industry, as EPA is headed that direction as it is. And the industry tends to feel that these standards are technologically feasible and attainable, so they're much less concerned about states adopting California's NOx standards. Next slide, please. There are companies out there that are moving forward despite these concerns. medium duty ZEVs are being deployed by many delivery companies. Amazon plans to have 10,000 electric delivery vans from Rivian on the road by 2022 and 100,000 by 2030. FedEx has also announced that 50% of its global vehicle purchases will be electric by 2025 and are aiming to transition to full ZEV by 2040. UPS has also ordered 10,000 electric delivery vans from the EV maker Arrival to be deployed between 2022 and 2024, with an option for an additional 10,000 more. So a lot of these are, the companies that you might suspect, the bigger companies that move a lot of freight across the country. Heavy duty long haul trucks, though, are currently being developed by companies such as Tesla, Cummins, and Volvo, along with some others. And they are still, I think, a few years away from being built in the numbers that we would hope, but they're coming. So, next slide, please. As for the EPA, they are currently working on developing more stringent NOx requirements for medium and heavy duty vehicles. They have been working with CARB on these regulations, and we've heard they will likely model their regulations after California's, though their reductions will probably start a year or two after California's do. For Maryland, adopting California's emission standards will provide those needed NOx benefits earlier than if we were to rely just on EPA, and it does help provide a backstop against any potential future efforts by EPA to roll back emission standards. Environmental groups have also been supportive of CARB and EPA's efforts on the medium heavy-duty vehicles and have been urging states to support stronger emission standards where we can. Next slide, please. Now, as for the next steps that we're taking, for medium heavy-duty ZEV MOU, MDE will conduct webinars with stakeholders throughout Maryland. We've been participating in regional webinars as well. We're working with NESCOM, which is the Northeast States for Collaborative Air Use Management, and other states and stakeholders to develop the regional action plan that Tad mentioned earlier. And we will be working with Maryland stakeholders to develop Maryland's own action plan for these vehicles. As for the ACT and omnibus regulations, we will continue to work with the other states to monitor these programs and outreach to stakeholders. And we will work with EPA and continue to urge them to adopt the most stringent standards feasible in order to maximize emission reductions across the country. For clean cars, we will continue engaging California as we have been and work with the other 170 states that have adopted California's program as we work with California through the development of that regulation. There are bi-weekly conference calls with the other 177 states, and we have monthly calls and meetings with the vehicle manufacturers. Both of these are facilitated with the help of NESCOM, and we are also engaged with the EPA as they determine the next steps with regard to the SAFE rule proposed by the previous administration that rolled back greenhouse gas standards and sought to remove California and the 177 states' authority to adopt and enforce their own greenhouse gas vehicle standards. So we will continue, engaging in them as they progress forward with those, with the SAFE rule. Next slide, please. And that concludes this presentation. And we'd be happy to try to answer any questions you might have.
Yeah, this is Bob Wright. One of the things that comes to mind is that many organizations are committing to a large number of vehicles, electric vehicles, in the future. And there are two things we'll have to support that. One are the producers or manufacturers thinking along those terms to make the vehicles available to buy. And the other question is, what about the grid? Are people, we want renewable energy and batteries to go with them, but are people looking at capacity to sort of see, do these things start to come together in 2030 and 2040? Or will there be a mismatch? Somebody has to be looking at this, and I don't know what group that is.
Yeah, it's going to take a lot of coordination between the companies and the utilities as they work to, install the infrastructure needed for these vehicles. It requires a lot of coordination with the light duty, and they use, much lower power levels than what these vehicles are going to have. Depending on where the vehicles go, there's going to have to be upgrades to so utilities near them, transformers, things like that. You can't just, plug in 10, 15, 20 of these heavy duty vehicles at one time. It could very well overload the system that they have in place. But that is definitely an area that we're working with our stakeholders on, trying to see what kind of power demands are going to be required to meet the goals that we have.
So Bob, this is Tad. There are a couple very active stakeholder processes going on this issue of medium and heavy duty zero emission vehicles. One is being coordinated for the regional process by NESCOM, the Northeast States for Coordinated Air Use Management. And so there's information on their webpage that talks about some of the key stakeholder working groups. One is an exact fit to your question, which is to work with the power generators. And so it is definitely being looked at. It's a hot topic. The other one that's a real hot topic is the one on making sure that the benefits are focused on environmental justice and overburdened communities. There's a whole separate stakeholder process on that. So feel free to check out the NES. We have a similar local process going on in Maryland. So you can, there's actually information on MDOT's website on that one. So it is being looked at, and you are right, it's a key issue.
This is Tim Shepard. One final thing to add on that infrastructure. In addition to what Tad and Justin mentioned, the Public Service Commission has been actively involved with this, more so on the light duty side, but it's going to start transitioning to doing heavy duty too. They've held several conferences, meetings on this to talk with the utilities and work this through as well.
Go ahead, John. Your hand keeps going up.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Robert took the words out of my mouth. I mean, you've seen so much, there's so much focus on electric vehicles, and it certainly makes sense where you have bigger vehicles where you have central locations where they come from, Amazon or whatever. But the increase in the grid, I agree, is a huge issue. And there's all kinds of press out there one way or the other. And I would just say that, again, I don't want to beat a dead horse about biomass, but 40% of our energy comes from thermal. A lot of that goes into heat pumps and other things, and utilizing biomass to a higher extent reduces the pressure on the electrical grid. That's going to provide more capacity for electric vehicles. So I just put that out there. Most people don't realize that, so 40% of our energy is used for thermal. So anyway, so I guess what I hear you saying though about there's a lot of efforts going on, but is there any type of summer reports about where that is right now? I mean, by somewhat of an objective organization, because I just see stuff all over the place, and it's very usually somewhat opinionated one way or the other. So I'll just ask folks here if they know.
What's your question? I'm not clear.
So the question is there any types of source of information that kind of encapsulates where we are now with the whole with the projections for the electrical grid and what the requirements would be to carry out some of the increases in electric vehicles and stuff? What type of power plant production, baseload production would be required, and where would that come from? And like I said, I've seen stuff one way or the other, different people opinions, but I just wonder if there's any objective assessment or something. If anybody had any knowledge of that, I'd be interested to hear about it.
I'll just comment very, very quickly. from the utility perspective, the only things that we can do have to be approved by the Public Service Commission, which is the oversight for us. And for electric vehicles, they let us do a pilot, so we could learn and they could learn about charging stations and that kind of thing, and put the parameters in place to measure and move forward in a gradual, slow way. So I don't think you're just going to see one night where you get 1 million new chargers and 1 million new vehicles. It's a iterative learning process, and I don't think overall capacity in this region is a concern, but I could talk to you more offline if you're interested.
Thank you.
And one quick follow-up before we go to the next question on the grid power source. Another angle that they're playing with the electric vehicles is particularly for school buses. They're looking to do what's called vehicle back to grid, because these vehicles are going to charge overnight. You're not going to drive too much and be parked during the day. So a lot of the school bus pilot programs, and the ones in Maryland, we are doing that as well, are exploring vehicle to grid, where the school buses, when they're parked during the day, can help charge back to the grid to support the grid infrastructure. So that might be another angle if Maryland having between 8,500 and 10,000 school buses. If as we phase into electric, that becomes a more viable source to back up the grid. All right.
Now, a lot of those would be our contractors as well in rural areas, and I just wonder, interesting aspect of that would be that if they have that capability from a residence to do that type of charging for a lot of those that are contractual ones. Just something to mention.
Right, and I think we're going to try to learn a bit of that as we begin our phase-in pilots with the vehicle to grid, and more like Howard County, Montgomery County, Baltimore, Frederick County, all that. But we will learn and hopefully be able to resolve some of those.
Weston, I saw your hand up a minute ago.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, I sit on the what was the Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Council, and now it's the Zero Emission Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Council. And I think one thing that should be helpful here is that the push for heavy duty zero emission vehicles tends to be the hydrogen fuel cell. So I don't think they're looking at purely electric heavy duty vehicles. And I know there's concerns mentioning the rural areas. School buses cannot go out into the hinterlands without requiring frequent charging. So it's something where I think the industry seems to be bringing back the hydrogen fuel cell for the bigger vehicles. That's all I was going to add.
Any more questions, comments? Tad, I'll turn it back over to you if you want to do any closing messages.
No, I know we've run over a little bit of time, so we'll wrap up quick. We are going to have some action items on our June meeting. We'll get the materials out to everyone early. I think the discussion on anti-tampering will be a very good one. We do truly appreciate the effort that the Advisory Council continues to make, and I think our progress report today shows that all that effort has been it has worked. And so we really appreciate everyone's effort. Randy, are there any other procedural kind of things we need to go over before we wrap up?
I just wanted to point out the next date we have is for June 14th, 2021. And as you can see on the agenda below, there's a couple other dates in the future. Just always good to put them on the hold your calendar for upcoming meetings.
9 a.m.
Yes, so long as we're still webinar, we'll be holding them at 9 a.m. starting time.
Thank you. And I would think that we just set now that the June 14th will be webinar only, and then just so everyone's clear, and then we'll reevaluate sometime over the summer about the September and December meetings. Is that okay?
Good plan. That's all we have. Thank you all.
Everybody have a good day. Enjoy springtime coming.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.